Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In today's video, I have this Synology unit right here that I am going to be reviewing in this video. And when it comes to Homelab, it's very often the case that the network-attached storage solution that you decide to go with is actually one of the first decisions that you will make while you build out your Homelab for the first time. So I actually have a few videos on network-attached storage on my channel this week, and this is one of those videos. And like I said, we're going to talk about this Synology unit right here. And Synology actually sent it over to me for review. So I am very grateful for them for doing that, because I just love it when companies send me things to check out. It's always a fun time. And even though they sent me this unit, I want to let you guys know that they are not a sponsor of my channel at this time. They sent this over to me for me to do a review, and that's what I'm going to do. And the opinions that I'm going to express in this video are my own, and Synology has not reviewed this content before I put it up. So they're actually seeing it for the first time at the same time you guys are seeing this. And I'm going to tell you guys what I think about this unit, the pros and the cons, and whether or not I can recommend it to you for your Homelab or your home, small office, business, or whatever your use case might be. We're going to talk about this Synology unit in this video, and I can't wait to dive in, so let's go ahead and dive in right now. So which model in particular do I have in the studio? Well, the model that they sent over to me is the Disk Station, and the model number is the DS1621 Plus. That's what we're going to be reviewing in this video. And when it comes to specs, it features an AMD Ryzen V1500B CPU, which has 4 cores and 8 threads. In terms of memory, this unit has 4 GB of ECC memory, and it's expandable up to 32 GB. That's right, you can actually expand the memory on this unit. If the stock 4 GB aren't going to be enough for you, you can actually upgrade it. When it comes to storage, this unit has 6 drive bays, and it's normally sold without any disks at all. But the folks over at Synology sent over a stack of hard drives for me to populate into the device, which I definitely appreciate. And it supports a maximum of 108 terabytes. And when it comes to price, this unit will set you back about $800 for the base unit. And again, the disks are separate. But we'll talk a little bit more about the pricing at the end of the video. On the front of the unit, you have easy access to the drives, as well as handy LED status indicators that are visible along with the power button. This particular unit is a standalone chassis, but they also manufacture rack-mountable units as well. But honestly, this unit can be made to look good in a rack as well. I've seen people do it. And as mentioned earlier, there are 6 drive bays on the front of this unit. But in addition to that, they also sell an expansion module that can add an additional 5 drive bays to the unit as well, if you want to expand it in the future. As I mentioned earlier, there are 6 drive bays on this unit. And in addition to that, they also sell an expansion module that you could purchase, which will add an additional 5 more drive bays to the unit. So just keep in mind, if you outgrow the drive bays that are on this unit at some point in the future, well, you can add more. Overall, the unit looks fine. It doesn't have an appearance that will draw unnecessary attention while still looking professional. On the back of the unit, we have 2 eSATA ports, 2 USB 3 ports, 2 really large fans to keep the unit cool, as well as a place to plug in the power cable. But what I really like is that there are 4 network ports on this model, and that can make it much easier for you to create private or back-end networks that are separate from the other services. And these ports also support link aggregation as well as failover. Now, I would have liked to see at least one port for 10 gigabit Ethernet, but they do sell a 10 gig adapter for this model that you could purchase separately from Synology if that's something that you need. When it comes to installing the drives, the process is fairly straightforward. You pull out the drive trays, you remove the 2 locking mechanisms that are on each tray, you simply push the drive into the tray, and then you use the locking mechanisms to secure the drives in place. Repeat for all the other drive trays for however many hard drives you have, and slide them in. Then you can lock the drive bays with the provided security key. Once you've inserted all the drives that you wish to use and you power the unit on, you'll be able to access the interface by typing in the URL that's on the Quick Start card that comes with the unit. But since I have an internal DNS resolver, I was able to access it by simply typing in DiskStation along with the domain in the address bar of my browser. When you first access the unit, you'll be prompted to set it up. And what this will do is install the operating system called DiskStation Manager onto the unit. It'll prompt you to wipe the hard drives in case you're using hard drives that already had data on them. And then it'll proceed to install DiskStation Manager, or DSM for short. Once the Synology unit restarts, it'll ask you for the name of the server and some other information. For the name, I just chose to keep it simple. I kept the default name of DiskStation. And for the username, I set the admin username to Velociraptor because, well, they can open doors. Makes sense to me. And Velociraptors are cool anyway. I then set up a password for that user, and I was good to go. Also, during installation, you'll be prompted to set up a Quick Connect ID along with a Synology account. But I already had a Synology account, so I just used my existing one. Quick Connect is supposed to make it easy for remote access, but I don't necessarily feel the need to make my NAS remotely available, and that's not really something you should do unless you have a very good reason to need to open it up. On my end, I have a VPN server, so if I need to access things remotely, I can already do that. Even though this is a review unit that I'll have to send back, I decided to review it as if it was something that I purchased for myself, and that includes setting up a static lease. A lot of people will set up static IPs for appliances such as this, but I really don't like that. With static leases, you're able to manage your IPs from one place, so what I did was I just logged into my pfSense firewall, and I set up a static lease there for DiskStation, so it will get the same IP via DHCP every time it starts up. Now, first of all, the user interface. We definitely need to talk about the user interface because it's one of the more interesting UIs that I've seen for a NAS. It's almost like having a Linux desktop environment inside your browser window, and it's quite fast and responsive. Now, this type of UI is not really for me. I prefer the more standard style interfaces such as what TrueNAS and Open Media Vault comes with, but that's just a personal preference. I think a lot of people will probably prefer the Synology style. It's pretty easy to use, and you have a start menu equivalent for launching different apps, each app allowing you to configure a different aspect of the device. Now, one of the first things I did was set up the mail service for DiskStation because it's really important that I get email alerts to notify me if there's anything important I need to be aware of, such as a disk failing or something like that. So that's definitely something that you'll want to set up and test. Now, although I do have an outgoing email server, I just simply chose to use the Synology email service to keep it simple, and it seems to work fine. I've already received several emails from the unit. Now, one of the features that I want to talk about real quick is the Security Advisor, which comes with the unit. And honestly, I have a love-hate relationship with that. It's great for most people because it'll let you know where you may be able to improve your security hygiene. When you open it for the first time, it'll ask you what your use case is for this particular unit, and then it'll proceed to scan the system. Now, immediately, it flagged some packages that were out of date, which I then proceeded to update. And it also complained about the fact that I didn't have update notifications turned on, so I fixed those things and then everything checked out green. Later on, though, the Security Advisor started to flag things as concerns that I didn't necessarily agree with. For example, I manually changed the permissions in the home directories of 2 users to make them readable only by those users. This is standard practice. Now, I'll never understand why home directories on various Linux distributions and appliances are often defaulted to world readable, so I went ahead and changed those permissions myself via the command line. But Security Advisor actually saw that as a bad practice, even though I don't agree with that. So when I clicked the button in the GUI to fix it, it returned those home directories to be world readable by everyone. WTF? After I enabled SSH, It complained that I was using the default port for SSH. Changing the port away from the default of 22 only offers a very minimal security benefit. It's a good practice in the sense that it makes sure your SSH service isn't on an obvious port, but an outside attacker will find that port during a port scan anyway. Now, if an outside attacker wants to break into your Synology unit bad enough, then the first thing they're going to do is execute a port scan, and regardless of whatever port you have designated for SSH, they will find that port, so it may only slow them down by about 5 minutes. But to be fair, it's a very easy change to make, so you may as well do it. So my issue here is that Security Advisor seems to lack context. The SSH port on this server is not accessible from the outside, so I can only reach it while I'm on my LAN. Essentially, if someone wanted to break into my Synology via SSH, they'd actually have to be in my house in order to do so. And if they were able to get into my house, it would probably be easier for them to just steal the entire unit than it would be for them to break in via SSH. So I think Security Advisor needs to better understand context because it can give someone a false sense of security or have people make changes that will actually lower their security. Context is key when it comes to hardening your systems. Now, to be honest, I think having Security Advisor on the unit is a good thing because you definitely want to make sure that you secure your unit, and it does actually offer some helpful suggestions, and not everyone really understands security, so having it is probably better than not. For me, I love SyncThing. It's one of my favorite apps. I use it to sync all of my laptops and desktops together, so I don't have to worry about which file is on which laptop because everything syncs to everything. So I thought it would be a good idea to install SyncThing on the Synology and then have it back up all of my sync directories there as well. SyncThing wasn't featured in the package manager by default though, so I had to add a community repository in order to get it installed. It wasn't immediately apparent how to do this, so I simply Googled for it and I found the instructions. It only took me a few minutes, and after that, I was able to start syncing over my folders. So basically, after I found the instructions for how to add SyncThing to Synology, I was pretty much good to go. Now, another test that I wanted to do that I felt was a lot of fun was I wanted to use the Synology as a storage backend for virtualization. Now, you can actually install virtual machines directly on the Synology, but keep in mind the base unit only has 4 GB of RAM, so if you are wanting to run virtual machines on this unit, you might be a little constrained there, and I'm a bigger fan of having a dedicated virtualization server anyway. So what I decided to try was I set up my old Thelio desktop as a virtualization server. I recently upgraded to a brand new Thelio that I will be reviewing shortly, so it just seemed like a good idea to reuse my old desktop as another virtualization server because, well, if you have the hardware, why not? So I enabled virtualization on the Thelio via the setup menu. On my end, the option was called SVM, so I enabled that. I didn't have it enabled already because, well, I use Proxmox for all my VMs, so I didn't really need to have virtualization enabled on my Thelio, but it's enabled now. Now, Proxmox is normally my virtualization solution of choice, but I decided to take the opportunity to test out XCP-ng for this experiment. So that's what I installed. Now, I actually enjoy both Proxmox and XCP-ng, but Proxmox became my default virtualization solution on my Homelab, but honestly, both solutions are great. But it's been a while since I've last tested out XCP-ng, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to test it out again and see how the project has progressed since the last time I've checked it out. So I went through the process of installing XCP-ng, which is fairly straightforward, and when the process was done, I rebooted my Thelio, and I was good to go. After that was done, I decided to install Xen Orchestra, which is basically the web UI configuration solution for XCP-ng. And with XCP-ng, the web UI doesn't come standard like it does with Proxmox, which is why I had to install this separately. So what I did was I ran a script to compile Xen Orchestra, and I actually installed it on my laptop. Next, I created 2 new shared folders in Synology via the UI. One is for ISO images, and the other is intended for VM disk storage. Once I added those directories, I uploaded a Debian ISO that I decided to use for the basis of the virtual machines, and then I added the storage repositories to XCP-ng. For this test, I decided to create 2 Debian virtual machines. And the idea was to have one use internal storage on XCP-ng, and the other to use Synology as a storage backend. I wanted to compare the performance between internal storage and using Synology for the storage. And as a simple test, I decided to use DD to write data to the disk on each VM. The first VM was using the default storage on XCP-ng itself, and the second VM was the one that was using Synology for its disk. Now, keep in mind, this is not a benchmark. There's simply no way that the Synology can even hope to compete with internal storage on the Thelio, since it's running an internal SSD. So this test wasn't intended to show one as being superior to the other. I was basically just curious how the performance would be over the network, and the second VM was able to get some decent speeds, though it was a bit bottlenecked by the fact that the network ports on the Synology are only 1 gigabit. To be fair, for 1 or 2 VMs, gigabit is probably fine, but it would be a lot faster if the Synology unit that I was using had 10 gigabit built in. But then again, this test was not intended to prove superiority, only to show how well the base model handled virtualization, but I think the performance and the speed would be plenty fine for running a few VMs. One of the features that I was most looking forward to checking out was the ability to install Docker right on the Synology unit itself. This to me is my favorite feature overall. You only need to install the Docker package from the package manager within the DiskStation UI, and for that, I didn't even need to enable a third-party repository to have that available. It's actually built into the standard repository, and that's pretty cool. But even better, Docker inside DiskStation integrates very well. You can see the resource usage right on the Overview tab, and even view the logs of each individual container right there in the web GUI. And this makes running containers a breeze. My only possible complaint is that it's probably too easy, to the point that it may abstract how the underlying components of Docker actually work. But then again, if you care about learning more about how Docker works under the hood, you'll naturally start exploring that as you learn. Now, for people that don't care so much about how Docker works, people that want to quickly and easily run containers without thinking about it, they'll probably like this a lot better because they'll be able to focus on getting the job done without worrying too much about the internals. As a quick test, I decided to install a container called The Lounge. And The Lounge is a really cool container that you can use as an IRC server. And the container that I used was from linuxserver.io. And linuxserver.io is a great place to get Docker images from. And their images are not specific to Synology, so if you wanted to run their container images on your Kubernetes cluster, you can do so. For this container, I created a folder for it in Synology so that I could set up its ability to retain stateful data. A shared folder called Docker was created for me, probably when I installed the Docker package, so I created a subdirectory underneath the Docker directory for this container. Now notice it's currently empty. We'll be checking on it shortly. I then launched a container from the image by going through the wizard. I clicked on Advanced Settings, and I set up the container to automatically restart. I then chose the directory I created earlier to be mounted by the container, and I mounted it at /config inside the container. Once the wizard was done, I made sure the box to run the container was checked, and I finished the process. On the Container tab, I could see that it was running along with its impact on memory and CPU, and I was also able to view the logs from the UI as well. I then checked to see what port it was running on, and I was able to access the container by typing in the URL to the disk station, along with the port that I saw in the UI, and it came up immediately. Back in the File Manager, I could see that the container automatically populated its default configuration, so I can make changes to the files here to customize the application accordingly. Overall, I really do like this unit. It's a shame that I have to send it back, but I did enjoy my time working with it, and I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it to anyone. I really love the simple UI. The package manager has a bunch of applications that you can install to extend your Synology unit even further, and I think you would be well served by purchasing a Synology unit. Now, one thing that I'm not so keen on is the fact that it only has 4 gigs of RAM on the base model. Now, that's probably fine if all you're going to use it for is storage and containers. You could probably run quite a few containers on this unit with 4 gigs of RAM. But where it starts to fall down is if you start to run VMs on this unit, then 4 gigs isn't so much when you are running virtual machines. That being said, you can expand the memory, keep that in mind. But when you compare it to competing solutions like the TrueNAS Mini, the base model TrueNAS Mini actually ships with 8 gigs of RAM. So in that regard, that model is actually better, but the trade-off is that the base model TrueNAS Mini has fewer drive bays, so keep that in mind. When you compare the two in their pros and cons, I think they pretty much kind of come out a bit even. But I think it all comes down to what you prefer in your NAS. Do you want a simple, easy-to-use interface that'll get the job done quick? Do you prefer the advanced features of ZFS that you get with TrueNAS? Do you prefer to build your own with Open Media Vault? The solution that you go with depends on what you're looking for, and I think that the Synology is a great choice along with the others. Now, I will be creating a video shortly on my channel that will compare Synology against Open Media Vault and TrueNAS. So if you want to see more about how this unit stacks up against the other solutions, then make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, so you'll be the first to see that video when I have it available. But in the meantime, if you are looking for a NAS unit, the Synology is great. I do recommend it. If you want some more information, again, check out the comparison video when I have that up on my channel. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and make sure you leave some comments down below. Let me know what you think, and then I'll see you in the next video.